Good afternoon, everyone. This is Angela Smith-Dieng from Hunger Free Vermont. Welcome to the 3Squares Vermont webinar, Down and Dirty with Deductions. And I'm joined today by my colleague and 3Squares Vermont advocate, Faye Conte. And we're so happy you're joining us today to really get into the nitty-gritty about deductions. And before we begin actually talking through the webinar, I thought we would just go over a few basics of the technology. So hopefully you all have your side panel. You can open or close it. You can raise your hand. You can ask questions. And you can use either your telephone or microphone and speakers. If you're having any troubles connecting, you can either ask a question in the question box, you can hang up and redial, or you can contact Katie here at our office at 865-0255 or kdavis@hungerfreevt.org. So hopefully everyone's getting online. We've got a number of people continuing to join us. And so why don't we just get started? So our agenda today is to review the basic deductions for 3Squares Vermont benefits calculation and walk through a few sample scenarios to show how that works, and then highlight some key deductions that often are underutilized and walk through some scenarios to show their impact when they are used. And we'll have some time for questions and answers along the way and at the end. And so again, you have the option of raising your hand and asking a question through the telephone or writing questions in the question box. And if we're not able to get to all the questions today in the webinar, the questions that are written in the question box are recorded, and we'll send out a Q&A document following the webinar with answers to all the questions, even those we weren't able to answer today, if there were any. I also wanted to mention that there were a couple of questions that people asked in their registrations that were unrelated to deductions. So this webinar is not going to cover eligibility, around income and resources. It's really focused on deductions, but we will include those questions and answers in the follow-up document for those folks who had those questions. Before we begin, it's just always important to remember that 3Squares Vermont is a program of the USDA. So it's a federal nutrition program known as SNAP nationally, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And as a program of the USDA, most of the rules about deductions are determined at the federal level through the law known as the Farm Bill and through the regulations that come down through USDA. 3Squares Vermont is administered by the state through the Department for Children and Families. And so the state does have some options for how it manages deductions, how it uses the deductions. So you'll see that some things in Vermont are a little bit different than things in other states. So why should we talk about deductions in the first place? What's the big deal? 3Squares Vermont benefit amounts are based on net income after a series of deductions. So while eligibility is based on gross income, and most households have to be under 185% of poverty to be eligible, the actual benefit amount that they receive every month is based on their net income after these deductions, which is why we're talking about them today. The more deductions a household has, likely the higher benefit that they'll have, the more food they can buy, the more secure they will be. And just a nice little factoid, about every $3 change in net income equals about a $1 change in 3Squares benefits. So every way that we can squeeze out a little bit more in deductions can really help a person's monthly benefit for food. And the thing is that many 3Squares Vermont households miss out on benefits they could be getting because they don't claim all the expenses that they can. And so that's where you all come in being able to help in this process for people. So the basic 3Squares Vermont deductions. The first is an earned income deduction. So about 20% of earned income is taken off from the gross income, which is an automatic deduction, basically to account for money taken out for taxes anyway. And that happens automatically. There's a standard deduction for all households by household size, and that's another automatic deduction that's calculated in. Court-ordered child support paid is the next deduction. And the important thing to remember about this deduction is that the child support needs to be court-ordered and needs to be paid in order to be counted as a deduction. So if it's court-ordered but the household is not paying it, then unfortunately it can't be counted as part of the deduction. The next three deductions we've bolded because these are the ones we're going to really focus on today because they're underutilized. The dependent care deduction, which is for both child care or adult daycare. We're going to talk more about that. The medical expense deduction for seniors and people with disabilities. There's either a standard of $138 or an actual expense deduction depending on the amount of expenses a household has. We'll talk about that in detail. And we're going to talk about the shelter deduction a little bit more, which is a combination of housing and utility costs. So let's get into the deductions by looking at a scenario. So we're going to talk about a household of 4. It's a family of 4. No one's over 60. No one has a disability. Their gross earned income is about $3,000 a month. They pay $200 a month in childcare, $700 a month in rent, and they do pay their own heat and electric bill. So what will their benefit be? There's a couple different ways if we want to try to figure that out. We can use the calculator on vermontfoodhelp.com. The calculator is called How Much Can I Get? And it walks people through the questions to figure it out. Or if you want to sort of see the behind the scenes, you can use the benefits calculation worksheet that's posted on vermontfoodhelp.com in the Outreach Tools section, which you can get to from the top toolbar on the home page of the website. So what we're going to do first is go through the calculation using the calculator. How much can I get? So there's a screenshot of where it's located right on the home page. So you click on that. And we're going to show you some screenshots of going through the calculator. So the first question is about household size. How many people are in the household? 4 in this case. And they're all U.S. citizens in this case. So then we just click Next. The next question asks about if anyone is a person with a disability or a senior. The answer is no and no. So we'll click Next. The next question is saying, based on what you've told us so far, it looks like there's 4 people who can all apply together. So that's what we're going to do. And then it asks about categorical eligibility, which is, does anyone receive the Vermont Earned Income Tax Credit? Or does anyone receive reach-up or post-secondary education benefits? And we're going to say no here, although I do have to pause and just say that this family should get the Vermont Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a tax credit to boost the income of working families. So you have to be working and have dependent and have children, usually, to be able to get EITC. So if this family hasn't claimed EITC in the past, I would send them to 211 to make sure that they claim it this year and connect with a tax preparer who would do that for them. Because once they get the Vermont Earned Income Tax Credit, it makes them categorically eligible for 3 squares. So little side note there as we head into tax season. So the next question on the calculator is about earned income. So we put in here that they have $3,000 in wages. Just a little note about the calculator, don't use commas in the calculator because the computer reads those as decimal points, so it will think that they have $3 in wages rather than $3,000. So just put the straight number. And how much can I get in terms of unearned income? They don't have any, so we click Next. So now come the questions about deductions. List your monthly dependent care costs, and they have 200. No child support payments. And then their housing costs are the next question. So they have $700 in rent, and they no mortgage, no taxes, no insurance. And what do they pay for utility costs? They pay for all their utilities at this point. So the next page, the computer estimates what they would potentially be eligible for. It looks like you may be able to get $182 in 3Squares Vermont benefits per month. And this page also encourages people to then apply and bring their application to the 3Squares Vermont office, which is just the DCF office. And if they click how to apply, it will tell them to send that to the Application and Document Processing Center. So we've seen that their monthly benefit will be $182. Not bad. Not bad. And you can, what I've done here is given a screenshot of part of the benefits calculation worksheet if you wanted to see how that calculation was actually created. You can see their total gross income of $3,000. They meet the income limit. When you take off the 20% for earned income, their net earned income is $2,400. Their standard deduction for their household size of 4 is $160. Their dependent care costs are $200. So their adjusted income is $2,040. When you calculate their shelter deduction, what they pay in rent, along with the standard utility allowance, their total shelter costs are $1,441. You subtract half of that adjusted income, which is $1,020, and it gets their shelter deduction of $421. As a household without a senior or a person with a disability, there's a maximum shelter deduction that this household is eligible for, which is $469. Their excess shelter costs are less than that, so their shelter deduction is $421. You subtract that from the adjusted income, $2,040, and you get a monthly net income of $1,619. You can use the benefits allotment table that's linked on the DCF website to then go through and find out what their benefit allotment should be based on that net income. And it's 182. So both the worksheet and the calculator give you the same approximate answer. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing walking through both those methods for people. I wanted you to be able to see and sort of see for yourself what method kind of makes the most sense for you and how you think about benefits to be able to go through this with a client. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the dependent care deduction for this family, since they are claiming $200 in child care costs. And this is question 41 on the paper application that I'm highlighting right now. So this deduction is for households where care is needed so that a household member can either work, look for a job, or go to school. And the care can be in a center or a home. It can be registered, unregistered, even informal arrangements with extended family or friends counts. Any situation where a household member is paying a non-household member to care for a dependent. And the expenses include payments made for child or adult daycare service, any co-pays for any kind of subsidized care. It can be before or after school care. It can also be summer camp care as well, and transportation to and from that care. And what's great about this deduction is that it's self-declared. You don't need any proofs, no verifications required, unless the household provides questionable information. Like they say they spend $1,000 on child care for one child. That might be a case where the caseworker asks for more information. So I wanted to do a take two on this scenario and see what the impact of the dependent care deduction would be if we said that that $200 was just their actual payment for child care. They forgot to factor in the fact that they drive 2 miles to bring their child to care. which is 4 miles a day, 5 days a week, at the federal mileage rate of 0.585, what this does is it increases their dependent care deduction by over $50 a month, which when you go through that calculation worksheet or that calculator again, it increases their 3Squares Vermont benefit to over $200, to $205. So that's a $23 increase from 182 to 205, which is a lot more food in the grocery bag. So the point is make sure that families with children in childcare or adults in adult daycare are sure to claim the full range of costs when it comes to the dependent care deduction. It's not just traditional childcare, it's also all of those other things, including transportation, and it can really make a difference in a household's benefits. So I wanted to see if there were any immediate questions that came up related to that specific scenario before I turn it over to Faye to talk about the next scenario. Are there any questions? Doesn't look like it. Great. Then, Faye, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. So similarly to what Angela just did, I wanted to go through a different scenario and take a look at the medical expense deduction and the shelter deduction. So in this scenario, we have a 2-person household, and both of the household members are over 60, so they're both seniors. They are no longer working, so they have no earned income, but they have a Social Security payment of $1,450 a month, so that's their unearned income. They're currently not claiming any of their medical expenses. They don't think that they have any real costs since they have Medicare. And they own their own home, so they're no longer paying rent or mortgage payments, but they do pay for their heat or electric. So given that scenario, we're going to go through the calculation similarly to Angela and see what they might get. So as Angela explained before, there are 2 ways that we can calculate this. We can use the How Much Can I Get online calculator on VermontFoodHelp.com, or you can download and print off the calculation worksheet, which is in the Outreach Tools section of VermontFoodHelp.com. And it's important to note there that there are 2 different calculation worksheets. One is for households without a senior or a person with a disability. And there's another calculation worksheet that's specifically for households that have at least 1 senior or a person with disability, because some of the rules are a little bit different. So going through the online calculator, in this case, again, we had a 2-person household, and everyone is a U.S. citizen, so we can just hit Next. And in this case, this section is asking if anyone in the household is a person with a disability or a senior. So there is no one who has a disability, but both are seniors. So you hit yes on the second question and then hit Next. And the next section is asking about categorical eligibility again. So it looks like there are 2 people who can apply together for benefits, and this household has not received the Vermont Earned Income Tax Credit or Reach Up or Post-Secondary benefits, so you can just hit No and click Next. And now that we come to the questions about income. The first page asks about earned income, and they have 0 there. And then for unearned income, Social Security payments go in public benefits, so you type $14.50 there, and you can always leave other ones blank instead of putting a 0. Either one will work for the computer. And in this section, because we have a senior, they ask about resources. We're not going to be talking a lot about resources today, but if a household has a senior or a person with disability, their income can be higher than the income limit as long as their resources are under $3,250. So in this situation, the household's income is below the income limit for a 2-person household, but they also have $2,000 in resources, which they can still apply with. So after we hit Next, it asks about the different deductions. This household doesn't have any dependent care costs, child support payments, and they're not claiming their medical expenses, so that's a 0. And then looking at their shelter costs, They don't pay rent or mortgage, and so you put 0 for all of those. And although they likely do pay their property taxes since they own their own house, they're not claiming them here. So that's also a 0. The household does pay for all their utilities, though, so you can click the top button for that one. And that one also counts for people who are receiving fuel assistance. So you hit next there. And it looks like based off of that, the household receives a minimum benefit of $16 a month, which is still helpful, but not very much. So let's take a look at the medical expense deduction and see if there's a way to help them get more. And just as Angela had showed before, we also wanted to show you the back end of how the calculation works. So before we go into the medical deduction, this again is just a little bit, showing a little bit of the calculation worksheet. They had a $0 gross earned income, so their net earned income was also $0. Their unearned income was $1,450, so you put that down, and they're a household of 2, so they take a standard deduction of $149, which is automatic. And then they didn't take any of those deductions, so the medical expense, dependent care, and court-ordered child support are all 0. So given that, their adjusted income came out to $1,301. And they don't pay any rent, but they do pay their utility costs, so they have a standard utility allowance of $741, which is their total shelter costs. Households with a senior or a person with a disability do not have a maximum shelter deduction, so you're able to take the whole $741. You then subtract half of their adjusted income, which was $650.50, and find an excess shelter cost of $90.50. So going through subtracting that from their adjusted income, they come out to a monthly net income of $1,210.50, which will give them likely a $16 benefit. So taking a look at the medical expense deduction. The medical expense deduction is available for people who are age 60 or over and for people with disabilities. It allows them to claim their out-of-pocket medical expenses. So there are 2 different ways that they can claim them. They can claim a standard medical expense deduction, which is $138, and that's for medical expenses between $35 and $173. If they have expenses that are over $173 a month, they can claim the full cost of their expenses. If they're claiming the standard medical deduction of $138, they only need to provide documentation for that first $35.01. If they then decide to claim over $173 in deductions, then they need to show documentation for all of that. And documentation can be receipts for prescriptions. They can be a printout from their pharmacist, and different things like that. It's for expenses over the last 30 days, so just telling your senior to keep track of their receipts and whatever they get from the pharmacy is a great way to help them document all of their medical expenses. After they're approved for the program, at recertification, if those medical expenses have not changed, then they can be self-declared and they don't need to show documentation again. So these questions are question number 42 and 43 on the paper application, and also have a separate form, Form 120, which is not required, but it's really helpful to fill out. It helps break down the questions a little bit more and going through what kinds of medical expenses can be claimed. So what can be claimed? Any kind of out-of-pocket medical expense can be claimed, and that includes premiums and copays, including premiums that are taken out from Medicare from their Social Security payment, which seniors often forget they're even paying since it's taken out before they get their check. It also includes over-the-counter medications and medical supplies, hearing aids, eyeglasses, dentures, and prosthetics. It includes home health care, medical lifeline service. It also, similarly to the child care deduction, it includes transportation to the doctor, pharmacy, or any medical appointment. And for that, they don't need to provide documentation unless it's questionable. So that's a self-declared mileage. And there are a lot more things that people can claim. On VermontFoodHelp.com, we have a medical expense flyer that lives in that outreach tools section with the calculation worksheets. And that flyer has a pretty comprehensive list of all of the different expenses that you can claim. It's a helpful one to have next to the application when helping a senior fill out their application so that you can go through and see all the different options that they might be able to claim. So given that medical expense deduction, let's take another round at this scenario with the seniors who only receive $16 a month. If they claim that $35.01 medical expenses, that will give them the standard medical deduction of $138, it increases their 3Squares benefit from $16 to $43. And so that's a $27 increase, and it helps seniors buy a lot more food at the grocery store. And getting to that $35 is probably pretty easy for most seniors. It could just be their over-the-counter medication. Now, say they want to claim even more than that. You know, an advocate goes and sits down with them and goes through their expenses and realizes that in addition to those over-the-counter monthly medications, they have other medical expenses like that Medicare Part B premium that's taken out of their Social Security check. So when an advocate sits down with this household, they actually discover that they have $300 in deductible medical expenses. Because that's over the $173, they can claim all of that and claim all $300 as long as they document it, and that will then increase their 3Squares Vermont benefit from $16 to $116. It's $100 more that they have every month, which is a huge help for a lot of seniors. You can see that the medical expense deduction can be really important, and a lot of seniors aren't claiming it, as well as a lot of people with disabilities. So it's a good one to work through with people. Now, the other deduction that we've bolded before that's really important is the shelter deduction. So just to touch on that quickly, the shelter deduction questions are questions 44 through 48 in the paper application. And the shelter deduction can play a big role in increasing someone's benefits. It includes their rent or mortgage payment, as well as property taxes and homeowners insurance. And for those types of annual costs, you just divide the annual cost by 12 to get the monthly amount. And for homeowners insurance, it includes the insurance paid for the structure itself, not for the rest of the belongings inside the house or other property. A little known deduction that you can take for shelter also includes home repairs or other damages that need to be fixed due to things like a flood or a disaster. There isn't a specific question asking for that in the application, but when there is a section for other shelter costs in those questions 44 through 48. So you can go ahead and put that in there if folks have taken on a recent home repair cost. The final part of the shelter deduction is the standard utility allowance. Everyone in Vermont now receives a standard utility allowance of $741, and that is for people who either pay their own utilities or receive a LIHEAP benefit. And so that was that $741 there. All of these shelter expenses are self-declared unless they're questionable, so you don't need to get a letter from your landlord or anything like that to show what kind of rent you pay. And so we just wanted to touch upon some of the different resources that are there to help you as advocates work through the different deductions you can take with clients. As always, we urge you to go to VermontFoodHelp.com, which has information for both you and for clients who are applying for the program. Inside of VermontFoodHelp.com is the Outreach Toolkit, which you can access from the top bar wherever you are on the website. And that toolkit has different flyers that can help you walk through some of these. So we have a flyer for the dependent care deduction. We also have a medical expense deduction flyer for seniors and a brand new one that is specifically for people with disabilities that goes through the different medical expenses as well. There are the two calculation worksheets that we talked about, the form that you can download and mail in to report changes. And as always, you can report changes by phone as well by calling the state PCF hotline number at 1-800-479-6151. And the Outreach Toolkit has a number of other flyers as well. So I'm going to turn it back over to Angela to see if there are any questions that came up.
Hi, everybody. So remember, there are two ways to ask a question. You can click on the little hand icon, and I'll know that you have a question you'd like to ask over the phone live, or you can ask your question in the question box. And I have received one question so far. In the question box, it says, how does a person determine what their Part B premium is? And I have a feeling an advocate from an agency on aging could answer this so quickly. My understanding is that it should be listed in their Social Security statement that as a deduction from their Social Security payment. That's my understanding. If I'm wrong about that, I'll let you know. But the AAA advocates, that's one of the first things that they take a look at, I think, when trying to claim the medical expense deduction for people, because it's a really easy way to get over that $35 threshold with just one simple expense. Are there any other questions that people have? Oh, I just got a response from a participant who says that the Part B premium currently is $99.90. So that's really good to know. Thank you, John. So another question is for the shelter deduction. If the applicant owns a home, do they need to send in written documentation on their taxes and insurance, or is it self-declared? I'm thinking on that one, Lisa. My understanding is that all the shelter expenses are supposed to be self-declared. However, I think in practice that hasn't always been the case. So I'm going to confirm with the food and nutrition team at DCF exactly what they'd like about that. And I'll be sure to include that in the Q&A follow-up, because that'll all get cleared with DCF. Any other questions? How does a person submit proof of whatever? That's a good question. So the best, if you're working with someone and you're helping them apply, you've got the application in front of you, the best thing to do is to try to gather any proof of the, proof of earned income, proof of medical expenses, whether it be receipts or statements from employers or whatever it is. You want to make copies of those things. You don't want to send in originals, but you make copies of things, and being able to submit those documentations right with the application will help speed along the application process for people. So that's a great starting place. If you're not able to get the documentation together with the application itself, those documents can always be sent later. And everything is sent to the same place, to the Application and Document Processing Center. The address for that is on our website, is on vermontfoodhelp.com. So those can be sent later. If an applicant doesn't know what documents they need to submit, they'll find out in one of two ways, or maybe both ways. they'll receive a letter in the mail saying we need X, Y, and Z from you to be able to process your application. That is also something that can be discussed in the interview, whether it's on the phone or face-to-face, if the benefits specialist still needs certain documentation, they'll ask for it at the point of interview, and the applicant will still have another, I believe, 10 days to be able to submit that documentation. Okay, I hope that answered that question. The next question is, did I hear you say that once a person submits co-pay receipts, over-the-counter receipts, copies of all verification, then they don't have to submit it each year? I do most of my applications online. Should additional information or required proof? Oh, these are two separate questions. Apologies. They don't have to submit it each year. So in response to that, the answer is yes. Once, as long as the medical expenses have not changed, you're claiming the same amount this year as the client did last year, then they simply write in same and should not have to submit verification all over again for the same expenses. If something has changed, then they need to document that change, what the new expenses are or what the change in expenses has been. The next question is, I do most of my applications online. Should additional information or required proof be simply mailed into the application and document processing center after the electronic application is submitted, or is there an online option? Oh, I really wish there was an online option, and hopefully there will be at some point in the future, but for now, documentation has to be submitted by mail. And yes, it all goes to the Application and Document Processing Center. So if an application is submitted online, what's great about that is that it starts the application process right away. It's received in the system really quickly, and a worker can immediately start taking a look at it. But they will still need that documentation by mail, whatever it may be. And so the best thing to do is to make those copies, include the name of the applicant, social security number, et cetera, on on sort of a cover page with those documents, and submit that to the Application Document Processing Center. The sooner the better. Hopefully there'll be an online option where people can email or scan documents and that kind of thing in the future. Another question that came in is, for medical expenses, you said you can claim premiums and copays. What about yearly deductibles for insurance? And my understanding, Faye, correct me if I'm wrong, is that yes, if there's a yearly deductible, yes, you can include it. You would just divide it by 12 to get a monthly cost. It would be like any other annual cost that the medical expense that the senior person with disability might have. Great, now the questions seem to be rolling in. This is great. We can use the additional information section of the online application to tell a worker that additional information is being mailed. Yes, that's a nice feature about the online application, is that there is a section for additional information for things that didn't quite fit in one of the questions or the response boxes along the way in the online application. And that is a good place to say, documentation forthcoming in the mail to let them know. I think that's a great idea. Next question is, when applying electronically, does the consumer receive a case number to include with documentation mailed in? Does the consumer receive a case number to include with documentation mailed in? My understanding is that when someone applies online, they're supposed to receive a confirmation number that their application has been submitted. And that would be a good thing to include on the paper when submitting the documentation. Okay. I'm going to take one more question, and then we'll finish up unless something urgent comes up. Can monthly medical costs be averaged over some number of months? Often purchases, expenses are clustered. And I'm going to put that together with this next question. And Faye, I'm going to give these to you since you're dealing with seniors so much more than me. So the first question is, can monthly medical costs be averaged over some number of months since often purchases and expenses are clustered? And is there a maximum amount for medical deductions?
Okay, so there is no maximum for medical deductions. So you can claim as much as high as you can get with your clients. And for the monthly expenses, it has to be expenses that have accumulated over the last 30 days. So if somebody purchased glasses 6 months before they apply, they can't claim that. However, after they apply and they're enrolled into the program, if a large cost like that comes up that's annualized, like glasses or maybe a big batch of hearing aids or something like that, they can report that expense as a change to DCF, and that will get broken down into a monthly expense and added into their medical deduction. So if they apply in December and get on the program, and then with their 30 days of expenses, but then come March they have a big expense, or if they go into the hospital or something like that, they can then call and report that change and provide documentation, and they should see an increase in their benefits to that. So I hope that answered that question.
Yes, thank you. Okay, great. Well, it sounds like there's just, a lot, most of these questions have been about documentation and medical expenses. And that kind of reiterates our point, I think, of this webinar about how these deductions are underutilized, partly because they do often feel confusing and complicated, and there's so much to them in terms of being able to claim them. Which is why your role in this work is so important in helping applicants to do this, because it can feel overwhelming if they're trying to claim, every medical expense that they might have. So we're going to stop with questions there. If there are any other questions that you all have that you want to write in along the way, I'll be sure to include them in the question and answer document that we'll send out to everybody following the webinar. And any outstanding questions will get answered. So I just wanted to highlight the key points to remember today is that deductions really are key to helping Vermonters maximize their 3Squares Vermont benefits. We know that certain deductions are often underutilized, especially the medical expense deduction and the dependent care deduction. I don't have particular statistics on the dependent care deduction, unfortunately, but for the medical expense deduction, the latest snapshot of data from the food and nutrition team shows that less than 50% of seniors are claiming the medical expense deduction, and only about 25% of people with disabilities are claiming the deduction. So there's a lot of work to do, I think, to raise awareness about the fact that the deductions are there for them, and then how to claim them and what can be included and what to do. So your understanding of these deductions, what's included, how to claim them, their impact on benefits, can help you better serve your clients. And then we really need your help spreading the word in the community to raise awareness about these deductions so we can really increase the benefits for Vermonters and help them get everything that they deserve. So thank you so much for attending and for your hard work to help Vermonters access 3Squares Vermont benefits. I hope this webinar has been helpful. Please share any feedback you have on how it went or any additional questions. We're going to send out a quick little 3-question survey and a follow-up email to you asking for your feedback. So I'd love if you would be willing to just take a couple minutes to share your feedback. And we'll also send you this presentation with the survey so that you can access all of the links that we've included in the PowerPoint, since I know you can't access them through the webinar. But we'll send out the presentation so you can access all those links. And if you don't already receive the quarterly 3Squares e-update and you'd like to, please sign up on our website at hungerfreevt.org. It's a great way to stay up to date and in the loop about what's going on with 3Squares in Vermont and nationally. And contact us anytime with any questions you have, ideas that come up, suggestions, thoughts, anything at all. Faye and I are here and trying to be a resource for you all and really want to make sure that the work that we're doing is supportive and complementing the work that you're doing out in the field. So there's our email addresses. Feel free to get in touch with us anytime. And I hope you all have a wonderful, happy holiday and stay safe and relaxed from all the good work that you're doing. So thank you all so much, and we're going to turn off the webinar now.